Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's segment is about Canada's cover-up of corruption in the international financial system. The Canadian government is just as complicit as its neighbor, the United States, and the rest of the world in hiding corruption and state capture in the international financial system. I will also present some information that was just published on the internet about military mind control technologies. These technologies have been with us since the 1960s. The fact that they are now coming to light shows that we are winning. Vitaly Glatfelder and Battiston of the Federal Institute of Zurich have revealed that the 60 private central banks at the center of the international financial system are part of a network of global corporate control. The network of global corporate control places the same directors on interlocking boards and controls 40% of the assets and 60% of the profits of the 43,000 companies on the world's capital markets. Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, and that means it's an interregnum because Queen Elizabeth II is not the UK's monarch due to the fact that her great-grandfather, King Edward VII, was illegitimate. Edward VII's mother, Queen Victoria, had an older son from a secret legal marriage at age 14 in 1834. This son was exiled to Portugal. Queen Victoria never divorced her first husband. Until 1974, the Bank of Canada did not borrow from private banks to create its currency. Between 1938 and 1974, the Bank of Canada made interest-free loans. After that, for some inexplicable reason, Bank of Canada borrowed money from the network of global corporate control to create interest-bearing debt that must be repaid by Canadians. A group of Canadians joined together in the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform and in 2011 started a lawsuit against the Bank of Canada in federal court. The Comer lawsuit to end this boondoggle for the private bankers is winding its way up to Canada's Supreme Court. I'm in touch with Comer as we all work together to end the corruption in the international financial system. The network of global corporate control owns the mainstream media and much of the alternative news media on the internet. There's a media blackout on the news that 44 nations, royalty, and the banks all agreed that the world's international monetary gold reserves and other wealth was going to be put into hiding for 50 years. This series on DCTV has been ending the media blackout about the global debt facility that is administered by the 188 ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF. We've been telling the history about how Jose Rizal and his lawyer Ferdinand Marcos put the world's monetary gold reserves and other wealth into a trust called the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II. At the end of this sequestration, that means hiding, nobody's claims to the gold would remain valid. This is because after 50 years, under the statute of limitations, these assets were supposed to come out of hiding and be deployed for the benefit of humanity. The network of global corporate control is trying to crash the world's paper, currencies, and bring on another dark ages, just like what happened when the metals were removed from the Roman coins in the 300s. That's a graph of the denarius, and you can see a graph of the United States dollar comparing the two. That's the denarius, so I guess we'll have to wait for the dollar. Quantitative easing is just fancy terminology for watering down the paper currency. Paper currency is no longer backed by precious metals. And let's see a clip of Ferdinand Marcos, where he's talking about the Dark Ages? As Ferdinand Marcos put it, starting off with his prayer.
For I know that as I have said in many a speech before my own people and before the world, fate and destiny has decreed that the United States of America be the trustee of modern civilization against the threat of a possible second dark ages. And America cannot fail. And therefore, we, the Filipino people, come and bring to you a prayer that God and His divine providence may grant you guidance, strengthen both your heart and hand, so that that hand may be strong on the lever of power and save our humanity. If America fails, then the world is lost.
The reason why we are not going to have another Dark Ages this time around is because enough of us are working together in a coalition to reveal the global debt facility. The decision about how to benefit humanity is taken by the world's ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. I'm the Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility. I have contacted Canada's representatives at the World Bank and its embassy in Washington, and also its mission in New York and its embassy in Tokyo, to let them know how they were abdicating their responsibilities. I will never forget my meeting with Howard Isaac at the Canadian Embassy, who told me just to drop the matter. Meanwhile, since I knew that the probability was greater than 95% that this corruption could be overcome, I just documented the Canadian government's betrayal of its people for future reference. I have published my correspondence with the Canadian government on the Internet. In 2014, the Board of Governors decided to use the world's gold reserves to replace paper currencies for currencies containing the exact gold value on the face of the bills. The Board of Governors also agreed that villages and towns would use their own local currencies. This is the global currency reset. The Federal Reserve Note is no longer the international reserve currency in the international financial system, the BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which represent over 25% of international trade, agreed to offset their currencies for trade among these nations. The Group of 74, which is actually 134 developing countries, have also decided that they will not recognize the Federal Reserve Note as the international reserve currency. Canada's University of Toronto provides a secretariat to the BRICS. Canada also has a global think tank called CIGI, the Centre for International Governance Innovation, which is in Ontario in Waterloo. CIGI is working with the United Kingdom Chatham House, which is a mouthpiece for the Royal Institute of International Affairs, on a project to harness the Internet. The 60 private central bank members of the Bank for International Settlements are dragging their feet and trying to prevent an orderly phasing out of their worthless scam currencies that are not backed by the world's international monetary gold reserves, administered by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF in the Global Debt Facility. The Federal Reserve bought up the elite's gold in the 1930s by issuing $270 trillion in Treaty of Versailles bonds. The Global Debt Facility holds these bonds, which are now worth over $2 quadrillion with compounded interest. Country indebtedness is offset against this debt from the private central banks. In the meantime, the Global Debt Facility has placed a lien on the Federal Reserve banks. These private banks are in receivership in the Global Debt Facility. The currencies that are held abroad are going to be redeemed through stocks and bonds that were held by the banks and their bank holding companies. The currency speculators are not going to get rich during the global currency reset. There has been a flood of paper currencies printed from developing countries, including the dinars, dong, and zim. Scammers have sold these currencies to people outside these countries. These currencies are not going to be redeemed under the global currency reset. The people inside the countries are going to exchange the currencies issued by the private central banks up to a limit for each person. The limit for United States dollars is 1 million. How and when amounts above this limit can be exchanged is going to be decided by the residents of each country. Other countries are going to establish the limits for their own national currencies. The gold is going to stay in the currency because the price of gold is very stable, and it's going to be calculated according to its historic value in the major currencies by using a basket of goods and services. People will exchange the currencies issued by the private central banks first for currencies issued by their treasuries, and these currencies will then be exchanged for the currencies out of gold. Now let's change the subject, and we'll talk about mind control devices. There are powerful technologies that about 9 out of 10 people are susceptible to. This is why it's taking so long for the corruption in the international financial system to be overcome. And this is a quote from an article on the internet. The secrecy involved in the development of the electromagnetic mind-altering technology reflects the tremendous power that is inherent in it. To put it bluntly, whoever controls this technology can control the minds of men. And let's describe some of the patents that are now being disclosed on the internet. One is a patent for remotely determining emotional states. They can use energy with a frequency that's predetermined, and its intensity is generated and wirelessly transmitted towards a subject. Physiological or physical parameters of blood pressure, so they can take your blood pressure remotely. They can look at the size of your pupil and how quickly you're breathing and the level of your perspiration. They'll measure this, and they're trying to decide whether you've got criminal intent, and they're providing this information to the police forces. And there's another patent called Sounds of Silence, the Silent Subliminal Presentation System, SSPS. This uses extremely low frequencies or very high audio frequencies and ultrasonic frequencies, and these are used to influence your thoughts. It's like hypnotism, but it's using electromagnetic pulses. The program can turn on your webcam at home and record video remotely without your knowing that you're being watched. And they harvest data from social media, and using webcams, this program takes into account nonverbal communication such as gestures, microexpressions, posture. They're using computers to read your facial expressions, and they also look at the text and speech, and they've created algorithms, that's mathematical equations, to predict and collect signals. They are predicting your social information. And they analyze your social media activity, and they look at your property records and the records of friends, family, and associates to assign a threat score. They're trying to figure out whether you're a threat. That threat score can then be used by police to prejudge if a suspect is going to be dangerous and to adapt their approach accordingly. And they've used these technologies in Iraq. They're called PSYOPs. They set up transmitters in Iraq, and they used Iraqi frequencies, and they overpowered the local station, and they were playing patriotic and religious music, and they also transmitted vague, confusing, and contradictory military orders and information. This electronic system was designed to speak directly to the minds of the people, the soldiers in Iraq. and it proved to be very effective on the battleground. It altered the brain waves for the Iraqi soldiers, and it manipulated the electroencephalographic EEG patterns, and they implanted negative emotional states in the armies. Feelings of intense fear, anxiety, despair, and hopelessness were created in the Iraqi troops. This effective system implants emotions in the minds of the targeted subject. And you can read the patents for this technology. They're all on the internet. It's possible to manipulate the nervous system of a subject by pulsing images displayed on a nearby computer monitor or TV set, and the image pulsing may be embedded in the program material, or it may be overlaid on a video stream, and physiological effects have been observed in a human subject in response to stimulation of the skin with weak electromagnetic fields that are pulsed with the extremely low frequencies, that's a half a hertz or 2.4 hertz, and this makes people vibrate in resonance. Computer monitors and TV tubes, when they're displaying pulsed images, emit pulsed electromagnetic fields of sufficient wave to cause excitement and to resonate. People can be communicated to without their knowing it. It's possible to manipulate the nervous system of a subject by pulsing images displayed on a nearby computer monitor or TV set. They're also using this when you go to a department store to influence you to buy things. The image pulsing can be embedded in the program material, or it can be overlaid on a different video screen as a signal or as a video signal, and the image displayed on the computer monitor can be pulsed by a simple computer program. And certain monitors, when these electromagnetic fields are pulsed, are capable of exciting sensory resonances. That means that you vibrate in resonance, and this is, without your knowing it, you're being influenced. They're also directed energy weapons. I was attacked by some of those weapons a few weeks ago, and it was as if I had had a stroke. Although I didn't have a stroke, it affected my speech for a couple of weeks. There's also something called remote voice-to-skull weapons, and that simulates hearing. People think they're hearing things. There's some more information I wanted to give you that says that Google was created by the CIA and a military group called the Highlands Forum. One of the interesting articles highlights the way the Department of Defense incubates war technology. It's described in great detail by Nafiz Ahmed, and that article shows that Google was funded throughout its inception by the CIA. Google was created as a weaponized war tool, indicated by many new inventions that DARPA and In-Q-Tel are focused on. In the article, and I've got a link to that, Nafiz Ahmed explains the Google-CIA connection. The fact that this information is now coming out is a sign that a coalition for the rule of law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF is taking back our world. There are a lot of decisions that will need to be taken during the global currency reset. There's every reason to think that the Coalition for the Rule of Law is going to overtake the network of global corporate control. What is unclear is whether it's going to be possible to dismantle the technologies that are used against us. There may be a period of transition in which we're going to have to coexist and to learn how to regain control despite these technologies being used in an attempt to slow us down. The global currency reset is going to proceed with decisions that are taken at grassroots levels. It's going to take time for people to get themselves into small groups and to establish clear communication. The media has been complicit in the corruption, along with the journalists, accountants, lawyers, and other elites. Now that the Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF has broken through the disinformation to a critical mass of people, the cleanup can begin. The misinformation is not just limited to current events. There's also been a great deal of misinformation about our true history. There's a project at Moscow State University which shows a deliberate attempt starting in the 1600s to obscure, that means to hide, the ancient past. We've been deliberately misinformed in order to create enmity and distrust among the nations and peoples. The judges and lawyers are not capable of administering justice. How can people rely upon the Coalition for the Rule of Law in the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF when there's been such deep corruption in the other institutions? Pay special attention to the fate of whistleblowers, persons who have been retaliated against for disclosing wrongdoing. Because some whistleblowers have been intimidated or corrupted, people must remain vigilant. People are going to have a chance to clean up this systemic corruption which has infested our entire world, from its financial center to our local communities. The urge to get even will be very strong. The global currency reset has been handed down from two men who endured many wrongs to give us this chance, Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos. The global currency reset is a gift of love that can only be accomplished through peace. I'm being informed that I have about 7 minutes, which is going to be unscripted material. In the previous segment, I was talking about 3 of the ways to show that the United States is not being governed according to its Constitution. And I wanted to elaborate and to go into further detail on that. And this is also of relevance to Canada because the other countries are also being governed as corporations. Their governments are not what they think they are. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the elections and how we're being hoodwinked. None of the candidates has acknowledged the fact that the United States Constitution is not in effect. It's not. What happened was in 1861, we were put under martial law in the Civil War, and the Congress, behind closed doors without telling anybody, has extended a state of emergency. Starting in 1937, the governors took away property rights. So when you pay off your house, when you pay off your car, you're not given the actual title to that property. You're given a warranty of title. Who has the title, the actual title? It's the banks. And this situation is something which cannot continue. It's got to be put back into legitimacy. And the Board of Governors has now, during this interregnum, during this interruption in a legitimate government, has given me the right to represent the United States on the Board of Governors. This is in order to preserve the world's gold. And as soon as the Constitution of 1789 goes back in effect, we can then replace the voice of the United States. But in the interim, we are not going to relinquish the world's wealth. We're going to make sure that it goes exactly where it's intended, and that is in the currencies. What happens when you replace these private bank currencies for currencies that contain the exact amount of gold is that there's not as much room for corruption. You're not going to be paying interest on country debt. What's going to be happening to country debt is that the amounts that these private central banks owe us, that's over 2 quadrillion, are going to be offset against country debt. So the tax that you're paying, the income tax that you're paying, is leaving the country, it's leaving Canada, it's going to these private central banks. It's just a big scam. and this is not going to continue. It's also very clear that the countries are being set one against another. What happened about 2 weeks ago was I got through to the Russian news people, the editor of a major newspaper. And what was also very interesting to me was that I was given his direct phone number. I explained who I was, and that the United States people, a significant number of them, understand that Russia is not our enemy, and we're going to be replacing the Federal Reserve, and we're not at war with Russia. What's going on in the South China Sea, that has directly to do with the global debt facility, because China is claiming that it has the right to the world's gold. We've seen that after 50 years, all of the previous claims are extinguished, and China has no right. About a year ago, some people contacted me, a Chinese company, YCF. They thought that I was going to hand the world's gold over to them. There are any number of contenders who have been trying to steal the world's gold. One of the entities that tried to steal the world's gold was the International Court of Justice. They issued a proclamation saying that all of the paperwork that Ferdinand Marcos prepared was no longer valid. I was given the right to express the voice of the Board of Governors, and I got in touch with the International Court of Justice, and I said, no, the courts have no jurisdiction. That was agreed to in something called the Bilateral Mines Field Breakthrough Successor Agreement. The courts have no jurisdiction. ICJ has no right to say anything about whether the paperwork that Ferdinand Marcos prepared was valid. Switzerland said that they were going to reclaim the accounts that had not been touched in 60 years. I went back to Switzerland. I said, you know very well that when those accounts were put into place, that you were not given the authority to invalidate those accounts. Same thing in West Africa, some of the West African countries. You can see on the internet how many different schemes I have had to invalidate. I'm given the authority to invalidate these schemes to preserve the world's assets for the world's people, which again are going to be used in a currency reset. Thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've discussed in today's segment how Canada's Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform has been suing the Canadian government to end state capture and corruption in Canada brought by the Network of Global Corporate Control. Canada is definitely a battleground in the struggle to end that scam of paper currencies and interest on country debt. Judging by the information that's being disclosed about the mind control technologies that the Network of Global Corporate Control is using against us, we are winning the battle. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Udis.